Hello, everyone. Welcome to College Democrats at UW-M Wisconsin State Superintendent Candidate Forum. There's an election coming up on February 16th. We hosted this forum just so everyone could get to know the candidates, ask them questions. I know we're a little less than a week away from the election, and this is a nonpartisan election, so it can be hard, to make a decision. And all the candidates have really strong backgrounds and really great ideas for education. I will link all of the candidates' websites in the chat, and I think all of them have their emails on their website. We'll have the candidates introduce themselves in alphabetical order.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks everyone for being here. I'm so thrilled to have this opportunity. It just makes me so excited to see our young people, our young adults that are so engaged in our democracy and in learning about the candidates and taking so seriously your very, very important vote. So thank you for joining us and tuning in. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to talk about education with you. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Sheila Briggs, and I began my 30-year career in education as a kindergarten teacher. And then I became a principal in an elementary school, and then I later worked in the central office in the Madison Metropolitan School District as an administrator, and my job was primarily to support 32 elementary school principals in doing all of the work that they did across the district. And I loved my job, and I couldn't have imagined leaving until 2011 when I got a phone call from Tony Evers, and he asked me to join him at the Department of Public Instruction as the Assistant State Superintendent. And well, I gladly jumped at that opportunity and have enjoyed serving in his cabinet for a little over 8 years, and then for the last 2 in Carolyn Stanford Taylor's cabinet. And so at the agency, my focus is really around academic excellence. And so I have 5 teams that work under my direction, and they lead all kinds of work, including things like student academic standards, career and technical education, academic and career planning and career pathways work, bilingual education and world languages, the work with our teachers of the year, as well as early childhood educator preparation and educator effectiveness for the state of Wisconsin. And so I'm really excited to be here and tell you a little bit about my vision for education in Wisconsin. Because of my experience working at the department with all 422 school districts, I have a really good sense of what's working across the state for our kids and what we really urgently need to change. And just a couple of things, I believe as a state, we really need to work on reducing high stakes testing. We really have to get back to respecting our teachers and increasing mental health support for our kids. And most importantly, we really have to fully fund our public schools. So I have a lot of things at the state level that I'm interested in adjusting so that we're sure that we're meeting the needs of all kids. But in order to do that, we're going to really have to be proactive with a really bold and coherent agenda. I kind of think that we're at a really important moment in time here coming out of this crisis. I believe that it's a moment in education where we really are going to have to make a decision that we're going to improve upon what is working, but we're also going to leave behind what is not working. And then we really have to move forward towards something better. And so I have deep relationships across Wisconsin. I know how to work with other state agencies, with our legislature and our governor to help our schools get the resources they need and to plan for recovery out of this crisis. And so we all know that this is going to be an immensely challenging time ahead of us, but I am ready to lead the department and excited to start doing that on day one. So thanks so much for having me.
Hello, my name is Troy Gunderson. I'm a candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and I just want to thank the kids from UW-Milwaukee and Rachel for hosting this. I would echo what Sheila said. We've traveled the state doing these things, and it's so exciting when young people get involved. I think the future of our country is in good hands in that you are learning to take a more active role in politics, and I think that's a good thing. The next generation will be maybe better at it than than the others have been. I grew up in a little town called Colfax, Wisconsin. It's in northern Wisconsin up by Eau Claire and Menominee. I attended K-12 school there. Matter of fact, mom and dad still live in the same house. It's sort of a apple pie kind of thing back home. After attending the university, I became a teacher in a little place called Melrose, Vendora, which is outside of La Crosse in La Crosse County. I was a high school math and computer science teacher. Then I spent 16 years as a principal, 15 of those at a place called West Salem High School, which is a high school of about 550 students. It's a sort of a suburb of La Crosse on the western side of the state. And then I spent the last 12 years as a school superintendent, doing all the things that superintendents do around budgets and all of those kinds of things. And so I've spent a 35-year career in public education here in Wisconsin, and I'm really connected to people all over the state because of where I'm from and where I've worked and who I'm connected to. I just think it's time for leadership in our state, someone who is able to bring the whole state together. I traveled and visited about 70 places this fall, including all 12 of our CISA agencies. And I just think there's a palpable sense in Wisconsin of it's time to come together. A lot of the policies of the last 30 or 40 years pit one against the other. And I think it's time for us to pool our resources. I've put together a plan around the word ready, which is ready to lead. And I think that's about making a vision. Students ready to learn, which is about us helping young children and their families be ready to go to school. And once they are in school, addressing all those issues that we talk about in these forums around equity and opportunity and mental health and all those things. Teachers Ready to Teach is investing in the next generation of teachers. Some of you hopefully are going to decide to become a teacher. Where are we going to get them from, and how is it going to be maintain a career out of that so that it remains a profession and that we don't slip into what we consider to be a gig economy? We can't afford that. And lastly, if we get all that right, we'll produce career college and life-ready graduates. And I just believe that after spending 16 years in a high school, that's really the most important part in our school system, to be able to determine whether or not we've done our work. So my accountability measures that I would put in place or favor would target towards what 18-year-olds look like. I've been actively involved in a movement called Redefining Ready to help identify rubrics around that. And I think that's important because we sort of live up to our collective commitment to the common good of producing citizens in our state if we think about what they look like when they graduate. So I've spent a lifetime in this. I've been given many, many gifts along the way and many opportunities, and they all trace back to public education. And mom and dad said, you know, give back. To whom much is given, much is expected, and don't stand on the sideline, get in there and roll up your sleeves. So I'm giving it a shot, and I've entered this race, and I think I can make a difference for Wisconsin because I think I'm the candidate best suited to bring the entire state together to focus on solving the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. So thank you for having me here tonight. Thanks to the other folks for coming again, and we look forward to a good discussion.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Shondalyn Hendricks Williams, and my desire to serve as your next state superintendent is grounded in my experience as a parent of two children, one who has multiple severe disabilities and one who does not. And actually, that is what really propelled me into the field of education. I attended my son's first IEP meeting and I was talked down to. And at that point, I decided that no one would talk to me like that again. I actually started off in a district as a paraprofessional, a teacher assistant. I've served as a special education teacher, assistant principal, central office administrator, regional director, and adjunct faculty. I have served children in every grade level from K-3 through 12th grade in every capacity for those who have immediately interactions with students in the classroom. In addition to that, I served at the Department of Public Instruction under the esteemed leadership of Dr. Briggs, who you heard from first. While I was serving at DPI, the governor won the election, and then I was appointed as a member of his senior leadership team and also the director of the Milwaukee office. And I served in the capacity to help usher the state through the pandemic as such. The reason that I want to become state superintendent is also because there are quite a few inequities in the state of Wisconsin. We're on the naughty list for a lot of things, and you know about that. We're on the naughty list for the biggest achievement gap, the worst place for an African-American child to grow up in, the largest gap in home ownership, the largest gap in employment and unemployment. And actually the pandemic really elevated our awareness of the health disparities. And so I believe because education has moved me along the trajectory towards continuous improvement, that it is the key to improving outcomes. Because see, I was a single mother on welfare prior to going to school. And I have managed to pull myself out of poverty and have the opportunity to sit here and be a contender for the statewide office. I am also the first person of color to ever appear on the ballot in the history of the state of Wisconsin as state superintendent. And so inasmuch as the other candidates and I, we have a similar educational experience, we have doctorate degrees, we have multiple licenses, and we even have similar work experience, except I started off at the very bottom and have had to work myself up while I was working, while I was raising 2 children. The other thing is I have gone from depending on the state to working at the highest level of the state at the governor's office. The thing that really sets me apart, young people, that I want you to know is what I call my disposition. So when I wrote my dissertation, it was 3 parts. In one part, I talked about dispositional leadership. And what that means is you are a leader no matter what role you're in. Leadership is not determined by your title or your job. Every day you make decisions that set you apart from others. That's leadership. And I've had a leadership disposition for a very long time. And when one has a leadership disposition, they don't need the title and they understand why it's so important to have compassion for those who may not have the same opportunities that others have. A dispositional leader also looks into collaborating with others so that they are able to have the voices of multiple people. The same way when I positioned the governor to talk to the activists during the riots so that he could get ground level information about what was going on and get their perspective, which later led to his legislation around no-knock warrants and all the other things. And in addition to that, you have to be able to communicate. And that means communicate with people who may not have grown up where you are, may not have the experiences where you are, and you're able to communicate in a way that you're able to understand, have empathy, and make a difference in people's lives. And that's the disposition that I bring because of my leadership skills. The other thing is there's been a lot of talk about equity. And so we get trained in equity. Some people talk to other people of a different race to learn more about their experiences. I don't have to learn about equity because I've lived in an inequitable state. And I can understand and see inequities, whether they're intended or unintended consequences. And I act on those. I'm not silent about them. I don't write emails in response to them. I don't write letters in response to them. I hit the ground working and I do something differently. So as you continue to talk to us, I look forward to responding to your questions, and I'm very excited. Rachel, I want you to take a big breath, big deep breath, because we totally understand, and you are a leader coming up, and we are very grateful for you assembling us tonight.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Deborah Kerr. And thank you so much for your civic engagement, because your voice does matter. When I was a superintendent in Brown Deer, I was always very impressed with how much our students wanted to engage in these kinds of conversations. Your civic engagement is essential. This is one of the lowest turnout elections in the last 3 years for the state superintendent. We're only one of 13 states who elects its state superintendent. And this is, there's a reason there are 7 people running, because education needs to change and we are all committed to making those changes. But what's interesting is we all come from it at different entry points and different experiences. So again, Rachel, thank you for having us tonight, and you handled everything with grace, just like you had planned it. So it's okay, and we will move forward. We always do. That's the characteristics of a great leader. So thank you. So who is Deb Kerr? Rachel, you did indicate at the beginning of this conversation that this is supposed to be a nonpartisan race, but it really doesn't go that way. Some of us are running a statewide campaign for the very first time, and so I just want to make sure you all understand who I am tonight. I am a very passionate, pragmatic Democrat, and I say that because you can't believe everything you read on the internet, so I just want you to know that. So I have dedicated the last 40 years of my life to education. I've worked in all sectors of education, mainly public schools, but I'm parochial educated. I taught in private schools. I started my own 4K charter school to close achievement gaps, and I've been dedicated to public school education for the last 34 years. A little older than some of you on this call tonight. I'm an award-winning teacher and a principal, superintendent, adjunct faculty member, athletic director, back-to-back state championship basketball coach, and I've been a proud Wisconsin superintendent for the last 20 years. I started out my superintendent experience at Little Wilmot Grade School in Western Kenosha County, a small rural school with 150 kids, 4K through 8th grade, where I was the superintendent, the principal, the business manager, the curriculum director. I did not drive the bus, but I shoveled snow and did playground duty. But it was a great way for me to learn the foundational skills of school finance and what it would take to lead a great school district in Wisconsin. And then I transitioned to Brown Deer School District, which is the first tier suburb of Milwaukee, like most of you know. And when I got to Brown Deer, it was 20% students of color and 20% economically disadvantaged. And we did not realize at that time, within 13 years, we would be this great, rich, cultural, diverse community that celebrates all of its children and the community and the schools, with over 80% students of color and 50% economically disadvantaged. And so we celebrated that diversity by everything that we did. As Chandlin talked about, equity was our main focus because we needed to make sure we gave all our kids what they needed. We joyfully served every student who walked through our door. The other things that make me unique to this position is that I have elected presidential experience at the State Association of Superintendents level, representing all of my state superintendents, and at the national level as the National Superintendent's President, and representing 13,000 members across the country and the world. And I've had the opportunity to work with people on both sides of the aisle as state legislators in Madison and also in Washington, D.C. So I know how to work the Hill, I know where to go, and I have great relationships with people on both sides of the aisle to continue to advocate for all kids in Wisconsin. Because to recover from this pandemic, we are going to have to leverage federal funding to free up state funding. And so I hope to accomplish this in my election as the next state superintendent by creating a vision for a world-class education system that is the highest performing for all in the country, including every single one of our children in Wisconsin. And we will promise that every child will be known by name, strength, passion, and need, ready to graduate to a future that they choose. So thank you very much.
How's it going? I'm Steve Krull, and I'm running for State Superintendent of Schools. I do want to say thank you, Rachel, for your flexibility on letting me come a little late on this. I had a parent meeting that I was in, so definitely appreciate that. Everybody else on the call, including the candidates, awesome to see the candidates again, and appreciate everybody who's here today. So thanks. I am running for State Superintendent for a little bit different of a reason than everybody else is. I believe that we need serious change, and I can't sit around any longer as things continue to fall apart around us. Our education system just is crumbling. I mean, we have a teacher shortage in the thousands. Services are crazy. I mean, some classrooms have 15, some have 45, and you just can't learn with the same there. And we have a student loan debt crisis that's caused because we've raised tuitions so high. You know, if we took tuitions from the 40s till now and adjusted for inflation, it'd be 9 times what our grandparents paid. You know, of course, that's why they didn't have a debt crisis, right? It's because they had cheap tuition. So we really need to change some of the things that we do. And I do have a proven record for that. I was in the Air Force, and I was an instructor and then a training manager, and I did a lot of change in that division, in that department I ran. I became a teacher when I got out, and I quickly went up the ranks. I've only been in this teaching game and this principal game for about 12 years. So I moved up pretty quick. And I've only been a principal for 4 years. But during that time, we really have implemented some serious change for the better. And we have some kids, our kids are doing great. And it's awesome to see. You know, the state rates us high. You know, every single subgroup is outperforming the state in reading and 11 out of 12 subgroups in math. So we're seeing a lot of success, and it's because of the hard work and dedication of the parents, the students, of the teachers, and the staff. You know, change takes a lot of people. It gets a lot of people to get on board together, and you know, it's not easy because you're always going to have resistance, but you have to gradually move through it and really work towards something better on a common vision. And that's what I'm able to provide, and that's why I'm here today. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to some of these questions. Not all of them, just some of them. So thanks.
All right, and then it looks like Jill is with us now. So if you wanted to go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right, perfect. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm Jill Underly. How much time do I have to introduce myself? I wasn't sure.
Like 3 to 4 minutes, please.
Oh, okay. All right, perfect. So yes, I'm Jill Underly. I'm the superintendent currently at the Pecatonica Area School District in Southwest Wisconsin. I've worked at all levels of education, from elementary principal. I was a middle school, high school teacher. I worked at UW-Madison with first generation college students. I also worked at DPI. I worked in Title I for 4 years, and then I was assistant director of educator licensing for a year. And then I left DPI and came to the school district here that I'm at currently in Southwest Wisconsin. My kids go to the same school district that I teach or that I work at. So it's really been a fun, just having them with me too. But, my whole reason for running for state superintendent is because I see inequity in everything every day, it seems. And so I want to make sure that we can, institute new programs or initiatives and policies that'll disrupt the inequity in public schooling in Wisconsin, because we see that it does matter where kids live as far as where the opportunities that they're presented. And so my platform is rooted in disrupting those systems and creating more opportunities for kids. So early childhood education, universal 4K, for example, recruiting and retaining high quality, passionate educators, also providing more mental health, not just for our students, but for our staff, and advocating for more resources to mental health. And then of course, our funding system. I feel our funding system is completely broken. It's not been really looked at since 1993. It's been tweaked, after Act 10, but it just made it more inequitable. I also feel that there's a lack of awareness statewide as far as, for example, vouchers and choice. And the amount of money that goes into private school vouchers is around $380 million right now per year. And you think about that transfer that comes out of our public schools and their funding goes into private schools, and you think about the inequity with facilities and programming and class sizes and teacher pay. We could be really making a big impact in our public schools if we were not losing dollars there. So I'm running for a lot of reasons, but I want to disrupt those systems, and that's my platform in a nutshell.
Thank you all so much. So now we've met the candidates. Now we can start asking questions. So our first question is, what was the state of Wisconsin's education system pre-pandemic, and how has the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated those problems?
Sure. So, it's really interesting because we have so many wonderful things about Wisconsin and Wisconsin schools. We have overwhelming support for education across the state in our communities. We have really amazing, dedicated teachers and administrators, and I might be biased, but I'm pretty sure we have the best students in the country. But I would say that pre-pandemic, schools weren't working for all of our kids. And as you alluded to, COVID-19 has really exacerbated every area of inequity that we already had has gotten worse. And it's really shown a light on those inequities as well. And so, as Shondalyn mentioned earlier, Wisconsin is the worst place to raise a Black child. We have the largest racial achievement gap in the country. And as I mentioned, COVID has made this worse, but I have a very clear plan for how we need to fix this. And I have very concrete results in getting this done at multiple levels in education. So the first thing is, I would say, I believe we are not just over testing our kids, but we have been focusing so entirely on test scores that I think we've caused some damage in our schools and our districts. And I really want our schools to help our kids be ready for life and have a broad range of experiences in school. But because we've had this kind of narrow focus on raising test scores, we've actually squeezed out really important subjects like social studies and science and music and art. Do I think reading is important? Absolutely. And my work leading at the department actually shows that if you want kids' reading scores to improve, we can't just be laser focused on reading. Research actually points to that in order to increase reading comprehension, we actually have to be increasing our time in social studies. And background knowledge and experience really improves kids' ability to understand text. And I've been leading work at the state, and the schools and districts that have shifted to this method of instruction are getting really exciting results, and we need to continue to do that. The other thing I would say is we really have to ensure that we have anti-racist school cultures where students and staff of color not only feel supported, but they feel safe and empowered. And that has to begin by ensuring that all of the adults in our schools have a deep understanding of their own identity, their own biases, and what it really means to be anti-racist. I would also add that this includes other biases, like making sure that we are supporting our LGBTQ students. We have to create safe and supportive school environments for all of our students, bottom line. I think part of this also gets at teaching our youth an accurate history of oppression, racism, injustice in our country. I think that's really important to helping us to create and sustain these anti-racist and anti-bias school cultures. And part of that actually includes ensuring we have positive representations of people of color and LGBTQ people in our books, and highlighting the tremendous contributions, not just in fighting oppression, but also in finance, healthcare, entrepreneurship, and STEM fields. And so this helps us build inclusive communities where we are celebrating all of the gifts of our students and our staff. It also includes making sure that we're diversifying our educator workforce. Our kids of color need to see teachers who look like them, and our white kids need to see teachers who don't look like them. And so all of these things are critically important. And then I'll just add 2 additional things. We are still recovering from the devastating effects of Act 10. I was, certainly opposed to that and protested in the streets with many Wisconsinites. But this idea of the way we have been demonizing our teachers over the last decade is really causing difficulty in our schools. And so I've never looked at the union as an enemy, always as a partner. And I've never gotten anything done well without teachers being at the table and being a part of decision making at every level. And then I would just say that finally, I mentioned earlier in my introduction that we really have to work on the school finance system and able to support all of this work that we need to do as far as the inequities we have in the state, as well as the additional challenge that COVID has caused. We shouldn't have a system designed around the property wealth behind a kid. We really have to start funding our schools based on what kids need. And we can't continue to take public school dollars away from our public schools and put them into private school voucher systems. That is hurting our kids and it's hurting our schools, and we have to have a system that works for everyone. So thanks.
Well, Rachel, I'd like to thank you for asking that question, because we've done 25, 30 of these, I think. And of course, the pandemic dominates a lot of the discussion, as it should, because it's impacting everybody. But allowing us to step back for a second and look at public education in Wisconsin before the pandemic, what were the issues? I think issues of equity that Sheila pointed out that are connected to race and where you live and the financial system. I'm a adjunct professor of school finance at Viterbo University here, and I get students who want to be superintendents from all over the state, and you see the wide diversity and the amount of money that they have to serve children. It's just appalling at how the inequities in the system, just in places that you think wouldn't be unequal. We pointed out all of the issues around race that Shondelyn pointed out. You know, our state just has a horrible history in that, and those issues haven't gone away. And of course, the pandemic has exposed that to be worse. Tuition. Where are we getting the next generation of teachers from when you've got to spend $100,000 to become a teacher and we pay you $40,000 to be one? And that's wrong. People older than me were able to, as Steve pointed out, were able to go to school for much less. Access to university and post-secondary, as we become more divided and we lose the middle class, people just can't afford to be part of that. Teachers and staffing, as Steve pointed out, you know, those issues of not having teachers, that's not because of the pandemic. We have created a situation where we've spent 10 years with a war on teachers to start with, and then also the demographics of the whole thing. We haven't forethought the fact that as people are going to retire, we have to be able to take care of that. Vouchers, we put that into place, and quite frankly, public education is our collective commitment to each other, and vouchers makes a commodity of it. It's really an attack on our system. There really isn't anything good about that. It takes away from our willingness to help other people. I remember and remind everybody on here, we're running to be the state superintendent of public instruction, and that's an important point to make. Last thing I think about, just division in our state. As you travel around and you meet people and you converse with folks, and of course 35 years of doing this, I know people all over, just sometimes the blank look you get when you start thinking about helping other people. You know, the freezing of our economic system caused us to use a lot of referendas, and referenda, Isabel Wilkerson in her book Cast, you know, we're all willing to raise our taxes for the kids who live next door, but we balk when it talks about pooling our resources to help kids we consider less desirable who live someplace else. That sentence in her book describes our state. We have the finance system that we created caused everyone to focus on their own little spot, and we don't have any collective commitment to others. So I think that all of the problems that we listed, from tuition to finances to race to vouchers to all of those kinds of things, none of that is going to get corrected until and unless we all realize that all of the children in our state belong to all of us. It has to matter in that little town in northern Wisconsin where I grew up, what happens to the children in Milwaukee? And it has to matter in Milwaukee what happens to the children in that little town. And until and unless that happens, we aren't going to be able to address any of these, because some of these issues require me to give up something so that you can have it. And first off, we have to be able to commit to each other. And I think that's it. Reading a book called Upswing by Robert Putnam. It talks about our social capital and how willing we are to share. And he theorizes that we peaked in 1960. So in my lifetime, we've become more fractured, less willing to help others. And I think this is what gives me so much faith in the next generation. You people are going to be so much better at this. It's time to turn that tide around again. It's time to bring the state together. And I think we can address those issues that were there before, and the pandemic has just exposed us for who we really are.
So prior to the pandemic, there were some students who went to school every day and they were using textbooks that were 10 years old. There were some students going to school every day and they did not have art, music, gym, phy-ed, health, computer science, library, media. There were students going to school every day who did not have a licensed teacher because there's such a shortage. And some people don't want to work in certain zip codes. So they had 2-3 different substitute teachers in one academic year. There were students who went to school and there was no social worker, no psychologist, no school counselor. There were students who went to school before the pandemic who really felt a sense of not understanding why their life is different than what they see on TV. And then after the pandemic happened, everyone began to experience difficulty. We had large numbers of unemployment. We had people who lost their house. We had students that lost their parents. We had some students who were being raised by their grandparents that lost their primary caretaker. And as we begin to go back, we're going to go back in a worse condition, bottom line. And so, you know, when I thought about what is needed, there's nobody on this phone. None of the candidates would not say that our students don't need better. But when we talk about inequity, I could draw you a picture of it. When we talk about equity, I've given you my Bill of Rights for students. There are 20 policy points on my website that clearly, when it's implemented, and that happens in every single school in Wisconsin, no matter your zip code, we will move closer to equity. Funding is huge. And you'll hear people talk about choice, charter, and public. I have served in all three arenas, and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. People say that public schools are taking all of the money. The choice and charter schools are taking all the public dollars. The fact of the matter is that choice and charter schools cannot get federal funding. So they don't get Title I, Title II, Title III, or IDEA funding. Those dollars go to the district, even though a child is in a choice school. So people say, we want the money to follow the child, but there's a whole bucket of federal dollars that don't follow the child. It goes to the district. Districts get a certain amount of money per child, then charters get the next amount of money, choice schools get the lowest amount of money. So they have to do more with less, and they don't get federal dollars for students who live in poverty, for students which English language is a second language for them, for students with disabilities. Choice schools don't get any money for that unless they get it from the state and they have to apply for it. And they don't get money for professional development of their teachers. But the fact of the matter is, why are parents looking for choices? I am the candidate that sticks out with this because I've said from the beginning, I defend the parents' right to enroll their child in a high-performance school. And you know why I say that? Because in the city of Milwaukee, there are many zip codes that don't have a high-performance school. We all sitting here as candidates know we're not funding our schools. And so for some parents, they are put in a place where they have to say, I'm going to enroll my child in this school because it's low performing, not because of teachers, not because of the principals, not because of the school board, but because the state is not funneling the equitable amount of funding there to take care of those children, including federal dollars that we get for the federal government for those children. Those dollars are not going there. Now there's barriers there. It's against the law, but the fact of the matter is, when some parents are looking for a school to enroll their child, they cannot find a high performance school in that zip code area. So they look otherwise. As state superintendent, I am going to fix the funding formula, make sure that there is a high performance school in every zip code so parents have a true choice of a high performance school. I cannot consciously, morally tell a parent that just because you live in a 53206 zip code, and you all, I'm sure, have seen the movie about the 53206 zip code. And because there is no poor performance school there, I'm sorry, even though you're a taxpayer, you can't use taxpayer dollars to send your child to an alternative and give your child a better life. No, I can't say that. What I can say is that we have failed when it comes to students who live in certain zip codes. We have failed when it comes to students who live in poverty, and we need to fix it, and we need to fix it really quick, because we are only as great as our weakest link. And Wisconsin cannot afford to continue to leave our students behind.
Okay, that's a great question. As Troy said, this is one of the first times this question has been asked. And so thank you very much for doing that. So when I read this question, I wrote down 10 different things that I felt needed to be addressed. But what I'm first going to say is that public education is the bedrock of our democracy. And we all know this on this call tonight. We've got some pockets of excellence that are happening across the state in white privileged neighborhoods, in rich, wealthy communities, and those kids are winning, all right? But not all the kids in Wisconsin are winning. And as Wisconsin has become more Black and more brown over the last 10 years, we have to deal with these inequities. And so this is what's been happening before the pandemic, and people have not been brave and courageous enough to do it and to address the inequities. Wisconsin's been on the list for having the worst achievement gap between Black and white students for the last 10 years. Irresponsible and reprehensible. We've got to change that. Also, state report cards paint a real rosy picture if you're growing a lot, but if you don't have high achievement, you're still getting high ratings on the school report card. So that's got to stop. Accountability means doing well in both achievement and growth. Wisconsin is also on the list dead last for early literacy with our Black kids and all the other groups that Wisconsin represents. Again, this early learning is really critical to closing the gap before it starts. We're also on an agrarian calendar that only is been in place because of the farming communities that we were raised on since the 1800s. So our calendars only care about time and not learning. Learning should be the constant, and to recover from this pandemic, we're going to have to look at our calendars a lot differently. The other thing is, you know what, we've had serious inequities for many years, and some of us have just ignored them or remained silent. And we can't remain silent anymore because the pandemic has exacerbated all of these inequities even more, as we've had to deal with not only a global pandemic, a racial reckoning, and now an economic pandemic with all the pressure to open up schools in our communities. Communication also has been very fragmented before the pandemic, but increasingly, there were some silver linings after the pandemic, especially with parents. We had 300 or 400 people on Zoom meetings for board meetings. Parents had a voice, and they were able to watch what teachers were doing during virtual learning and better engage with their kids. So there are some things we're going to have to do that we can't go back to. Before the pandemic too, we only had some kids that had teachers that looked like them. So in Brown Deer, I was very intentional. I hired the most diverse administrative staff and the most diverse teaching staff in the suburbs because our kids needed to see others that look like them so they had someone else they could relate to and talk to. So after this pandemic, we have a choice. Either we're going to go back to the old way of doing business or we're going to transform our educational system. And that's what I'm going to do as the next state superintendent. And I'm the only candidate that has a state school reentry plan that will best serve all staff safely and sensibly. Parents are desperate to have their children come back to school, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country. But what we can learn from our colleagues in Wisconsin is that they have opened up schools safely. Wausau and some of the other areas, even Kenosha down south by myself here in Caledonia. And so we can learn from them. But it's going to take a laser focus on aligned interventions because our kids are significantly behind. Some kids are over a year behind. And so this is going to be detrimental to our success as a state because we're going to be in recovery for many years to come. And the final piece that I want to share is that partnerships are going to be so critical moving forward. Partnerships with our industry and businesses and our foundations and other associations, all those people who rallied around our schools during this pandemic. And so we are going to have to do things differently and be ready to recover from this terrible pandemic. Thank you.
So there's a lot of issues going on. You know, incomes are going down. Millennials make less than their parents and grandparents. Healthcare costs are up. Housing costs are up. You know, there's not even retirement accounts anymore, right? And Social Security is under attack. You know, there's a lot of issues, and I believe that part of what we can do as professionals in education is actually work on education, which is, I agree, the bedrock of our democracy. And so to do that, though, we have to identify that there's serious flaws that are creating some of those other components, but it's also intertwined with those components. I mean, we have the most educated population of young people ever, and they're making less than their parents did. So, you know, there's serious structural problems that we do need to address besides education. But as far as your question goes, yeah, it's bad out there. It depends on where you live. That depends on how good your school is. I mean, if you've got, you know, really expensive houses, well, then you're probably going to have more resources for your schools. And so we have a serious funding flaw, and that is because of the way we have our funding set up in Wisconsin. And that really needs to change. And that's a big part of what this campaign is about changing that funding formula and looking at it in a more equal and equitable way across the state. You know, teacher shortage, you know, that's something that's getting worse. You know, before the pandemic, there was 3,000, you know, people on emergency licenses or unfilled positions. And so untrained people, and it just doesn't work. You know, 40% of people leave within the first 5 years. And that's just not good. You know, a lot of reasons why, but, you know, we need to rebuild the teaching field. How is that different now with the pandemic? I think that it's worse, but I think that there's a lot of good efforts going on right now. You know, GM and Ford, when the government told them they had to make ventilators, they said it would probably take a year or two to retool. Look what education did. We were able to retool in a few months, and we didn't get all of that extra money that those corporations got. We just put it more on the back of teachers. We put it more on the back of parents, and honestly changed the whole structure of how kids learn. And I feel like that is, you know, it's horrible. Obviously, I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But, you know, the inequities are there too. You look at some rural areas and there's no broadband. So how are you going to connect and do a one-on-one with no broadband or really, really poor connections? And, you know, if you can't afford the technology, you can't bring kids back because you don't have good ventilation, or you have 35, 45 kids in the room, so you can't physically distance, or you can't afford masks. You know, those inequities really drive, we've really spotlighted them now that we're sitting here, and it's affecting not just the teachers who knew it all along, or the administrators, or anybody in education, but really all of us have noticed. And I think that this brings an opportunity to really have change and really bring these conversations forward with this momentum and say, let's do something different right now, because we can. You guys see how horrible it is. Let's change that right now. And that's kind of the way that I view the before and after is, yeah, it's bad. It's horrible what happened, but really, hopefully we can turn this into something better. Hopefully we can make it better for education. And I think that we should use this opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank you all. I know I came in late, so I wanted to thank you all for just your flexibility and just for being here tonight to listen to all of us, but also just I appreciate your engagement and your advocacy very much too. We already had so much inequity pre-pandemic, especially in opportunities provided to all kids. But before I start, I want to correct something that Dr. Hendricks had said. She said that choice schools or private schools are not, you know, they are doing more with less. That is not true. They do get federal dollars, and especially through Title I. I worked at DPI for 5 years, right around Act 10. I left in 2014. And at the time when I was in Title I, Milwaukee Public Schools allocation was around $88 million. Now it's at $66 million. And they get $17 million of that goes to private schools through equitable participation. So it's not going to choice schools, but it's just going to private schools who, because the money does follow the kids. So I just wanted to correct the record there. And it's not about winning. I think we need to invest in our public schools. And because that's where the collective investment is, as Troy had said. Otherwise, when you invest in choices, or private schools instead of public schools, you're creating two systems. One where parents with means, or those who can opt in through vouchers, can choose a better school than the one that's available. And we should be investing our public dollars in our public schools so that all our public schools are great. And again, it's not about winning, it's about kids. And it's about opportunity. And the inequities that existed before the pandemic are the reasons I decided to run in 2019. When I heard that the incumbent was not going to seek re-election, I knew this is what I needed to do. And then the pandemic hit, and I was there. I was leading my school, helping families, advocating on behalf of kids and families for more resources. And I think it's important to note that I'm the only candidate who is currently leading a school district through this pandemic. I'm working with families, I'm working with legislators, I'm working with parents and school boards. And the inequities that existed before the pandemic between rural and urban and suburban, the technology, the teacher recruitment, the retention of teachers, the salaries, the opportunity gaps, the internet access, the funding of our public schools versus the funneling of money into vouchers. Think about our facilities. If we did not put all that money into vouchers from our public school funding, what kind of facilities would the schools in Milwaukee Public Schools have? Their average building age is 85 years old. And we're being told that in order to get through the pandemic and to mitigate this, we need to increase, or improve our HVAC systems. How many public schools do you know that can afford that? So that's when we talk about inequity, there's problems that existed that the pandemic just exacerbated. And our public schools are so uneven because, of funding being uneven. Urban and rural have a lot of the same issues. And at the root of all this is our funding. And it's basically based on how wealthy a community is, and our resources don't go to the schools that need it the most. And COVID has laid bare these inequities, that particularly with educational access, internet and high-speed wireless, particularly in rural areas, but also the cost. I mean, there's plenty of families throughout Wisconsin who don't live in rural areas that just can't afford high-speed internet. And so when we're testing kids or when we're trying to make sure that they have access to the curriculum, that's what a public school does. It makes sure that the playing field is even. And when we have to be virtual, or when we have to choose, I guess, to go to a private school, what we're doing is we're making the playing field uneven. So, I mean, we have to look at, it's just, there's a lot of issues. And the individuals in here, I think we all agree on a lot of the same things. But it's just that the pandemic has made things worse, and our kids are suffering, our teachers are suffering, and we need to do something about it. And I've been advocating to our legislator, I've been advocating to a legislature, I've been advocating to our federal government. We need to make things better, and there needs to be more action from them.
Thank you all. Okay, so we're going to move to our sort of rapid response questions here that came from people in the chat. I know you have somewhere to be at 7 o'clock, all of you. I was alerted of that, so we'll get it moving. So the next question is, what would be your #1 priority upon entering office? If you could keep these under 2 minutes just so we can get to everybody. Thank you.
Sure. So we've talked about this a lot, but my #1 priority is going to be supporting our schools and districts in recovering from this pandemic. And so part of that is going to be getting our equity budget through the legislature. And so when this election concludes, we're going to be in the final stages of working with the governor to usher that through. That's going to be #1, because we can't let the cost of this pandemic be balanced on the backs of our teachers or our kids. It's also going to provide an opportunity to get started right away, continuing to build relationships and work with our legislators to articulate a really progressive vision for education in Wisconsin, one that values all of our kids, especially those that need us the most. And then secondly, we really have to make sure that our teachers are getting access to the vaccine, and that we're supporting our schools with all of the equipment and support that they need to be able to make sure that our schools can all get open as quickly as safely possible. And last but not least, while we are navigating this crisis, we also have to focus on the recovery plan academically, so that we're creating a future that's better than the past. We're going to have to deal with all of the trauma and the mental health issues and the anxiety and depression and isolation that folks have dealt with throughout this crisis, which includes our adults as well as our children. But we can do that also at the same time that we're addressing their academic needs. But I think one of the things that's really important that we have to make sure that we're doing is not falling into the trap of remediation. We know that does not work. And so this aligns with the work I've been leading at the state already. We need to make sure that all teachers have access to really high quality instruction instructional materials so that they can use really high quality grade level instruction, and the kids that are behind need extra supports and scaffolds to access that really high quality instruction. This is what helps everybody continue moving forward while we catch up the kids that are behind. We cannot go back to the old ways of bringing instruction down to kids level. We have to bring kids up to the high quality level of instruction. I have demonstrated results in doing this in the state of Wisconsin, and we need to make sure that we shift every single school and district to make sure that's how they're educating our youth, so that we can make sure we come out of this pandemic and continue moving kids forward while we're catching them up. I have a track record of success doing this, closing gaps when I was a school leader, as well as we're getting results in the state moving in this direction, and that's going to be the #1 priority.
Okay. My #1 priority, a little bit different, because I think from my time as a superintendent and a principal, I always learned a few lessons along the way. And one of them is to not let management overrun my ability to lead. And all of the things that Sheila just listed, of course, serving the children and getting them back to school, all those kinds of things are types of management issues that we need to pull together. But I just don't think that we are ever going to be able to address the systemic issues we all talked about in the last question until we are all in this together. And so when I hit the ground, I am going to be focused on helping our state create a vision for moving education forward. I would say this when I was superintendent, when something would be off the rails or different, I would say, here's our shot. Here's our shot to be better. Here's our shot to get this right. You know, when our entire computer system collapsed, you know, everybody wants to buy a switch and a wire and a 2-year-old computer. And I'm like, well, here's our shot. Let's get rid of all of it. We became the first district in the area to be 1-to-1. We started over because you can't, you know, we have people who can manage and get those things done, but leadership is what we need. Here's our shot. Here's our shot to redefine public education in Wisconsin to be the organization that moves our state forward. This state is not going to move forward until we get our act together, and that the lady in Superior is connected with the people in Milwaukee. The people in Platteville are connected to the people in Medford. It has to work that way. We've avoided that for decades. We've created a system that pits one against the other, and all of those little things are like a kid running around putting their finger in the dike. We have to be in this together. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I said it on every one of these things. I think we need to be ready to lead. And until and unless we're all in this together, all of the rest of it is window dressing. We have to be in this together. So day one, I'm going to start with that focus.
Good evening. Typically, I don't respond when what I say is questioned, but I'm going to respond. I served 3 years as Regional Director of Non-Public Educational Services. Like I said before, title money and IDEA money goes to the district. In Milwaukee, the district puts out an RFP, and they allow for-profit educational firms to respond to that RFP, and they give the money to the for-profit educational firms. The money does not go to the choice schools. I know this because I did this for 3 years. And if a child who has a disability, or say a parent or a teacher wants a child to be tested for special education. Remember, I was a special education teacher, and I was a special education supervisor at NPS, and I supervised special education in the district in this city. If a child is in a private school and the parent wants that child tested, NPS tests the child. NPS writes the IEP, and then NPS tells the parent, if you want your child to receive their service, they have to withdraw from the choice school and enroll in the public school. Otherwise, what we give are equitable service based on a service plan, not an IEP. This is a problem that I find in my life, and I'm going to be quite blank. You know, we have to believe what people say when they don't look like you, and you cannot assume that they don't know what they're talking about. I am highly offended, and I'm just going to call it out right now, because I did this for 3 years, and I know exactly how it goes. This is a reason why we really need to check ourselves, and we really need to know how to get along with people. We really need to understand what we're talking about, and before we publicly question someone, particularly someone of color. When I am state superintendent, I am going to battle this and the other inequitable practices that make it okay to treat people different based on their income, based on their race, based on their social economical level, based on their neighborhood, whatever. Because I'll say again, one thing that I admire about Troy, he has said from the beginning, it matters to him what happens in Milwaukee, and what happens in Milwaukee has to matter other places. But I cannot speak to Troy about what goes on up there unless I've had some experience there. Otherwise, I'm going to defer to what Troy says. We need to understand that. We need to understand that different people come to the table with different levels of knowledge, and all people's voices need to be upheld, and all people's voices need to be questioned, need to be respected.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, what I would do is one of the first priorities is just what Shannon was talking about, focusing on excellence and equity for all kids. So I also want to address the charter, voucher, and choice school situation. What everybody needs to know on this call is that the state superintendent oversees all children in Wisconsin. So the 46,000 kids who are in these other sectors have to be given the same opportunities that others. Hey, I know this is an issue that divides us. I was not around when all the fights happened 30 or 40 years ago. But what I want to do is I want to bring all stakeholders to the table, and let's try to problem solve around this. What other revenue sources could we use to make sure that everyone is whole? Because if every child was whole in Wisconsin, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We probably would be arguing over standardized tests. You know, it's not either or and, it's and. It's public and other sectors that we have to serve. So my equity, my commitment to equity would be more than just awareness. It would be a framework that we implement across the state for all stakeholders. That starts with students, teachers and educators, school boards, leaders, and school communities. You know, look all around us right now. There are many programs and associations that are focusing on equity, understanding our inherent biases, understanding how we can better get over our white privilege. Okay, and we as white leaders have to stand up for our kids, like I did in Brown Deer when my football team was called the N-word. And that was not the first time it ever happened. So I stood up for them. I did not take the apology from the other superintendent because this was unacceptable, because the adults in the situation did not handle it. So I did go viral and say, this is not right. Enough is enough. Our kids can't continue to be marginalized. All of our BIPOC kids continue to be marginalized in our state of Wisconsin. It's unacceptable. So we have to take action, create discrimination policies, make sure our school boards understand what equity means. It's not just about racism. It's about access and opportunity. And it goes to equitable funding. I used to teach school finance, so I know what it takes to change the funding formula. But we have to make sure that all kids have what they need if we are truly going to be equitable. And then the final piece is connecting the dots between the workforce development needs of our state and education. You know, the highest needs for jobs, IT, healthcare, agriculture, manufacturing, teaching. We got to do a better job of exposing all of our kids early on so that we become the talent pipeline for our industries and businesses and our colleges in Wisconsin, because that will contribute to everyone's economic vitality. Thank you.
Okay, so number one priority. I believe that right now, the top-down approach that's been going on for the past 30, 40 years hasn't worked, right? If it had, then we wouldn't be having these conversations that we're having about inequities or about teacher shortages or about college tuition, because it would have been working. but it isn't. We got to change the system, and we can't continue to do top-down approaches. We have plans that have been in place or commissions that have results and findings, but we really haven't done any of that. We continue to talk and there's no action. We need action. And I just can't sit here and sit around and say we need to write another white paper or we need to do another commission. We know what needs to happen. What needs to happen is we need to fund our schools correctly. We need to get teachers in the classroom. We need to lower college tuition. And we need to make sure that our kids in Wisconsin have the best services possible. It's easy as that. And what it takes people to step up and actually do it. Not sit there and go, oh, you know, I don't know if I'm going to worry about this, or maybe this won't work, or maybe I have to. No, you just do it. I mean, think about what FDR did and how he transformed the nation. He didn't do that because he was, worried about what people thought about him or if they could do it or not. He transformed our economy from what it's headed towards, which is you're rich, you got everything, and if you're not, well, then you work 16-hour days, 6 days a week, and if you get hurt, well, too bad. We have someone else waiting in line to take your job. That's where we're headed, and we have to push back against that system. Education is part of that. Our system is crumbling right now, and we need to fix it. Before I switch to the next thing, I don't want to get into a debate, although I do disagree and agree with some things that were said in that debate. But I will say that Troy Putnam, good stuff, man. He had that real groundbreaking book, Bowling Alone. It was good on social networks, and so a good read if anybody hasn't read it yet. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My number one priority upon entering office would be also equity. I would appoint a full-time cabinet level equity officer to help our school districts analyze their practices and their curriculum, such as computer science, for example, or how much history and civics they're receiving. Also AP classes, and making sure that we have kids of color, students with disabilities, girls, for example, represented in our STEM classes. But we also need to look at our student handbooks. We need to look at our dress codes. We need to look at our school board policies, hiring practices for teachers and staff. We need to look at our extracurricular participation, our AP class enrollment, preschool enrollment. We need to identify areas of inequity that we can improve on. And I really want to dismantle these historic systems of racism and inequity that are the basis for so much of what we do in school. So again, just to summarize, I'd create a cabinet level position focused on equity and closing gaps, invest in early childhood education, diversify our teaching workforce, and let's not penalize struggling schools. Let's invest in those schools. That's equity, and actively undo the racist structures in the system.
Thank you all so much. I know you have the Dane Dems thing after this. Do you all have to go right now? Or do you have a little time to answer one more question? I'm really sorry.
I'm sorry if I could just jump in. I can stay for a little bit, but I have to jump out at 6:45 to start a school board meeting, and then I can come back in before I have to leave again at 7.
All right. Is everyone kind of on the same page there? I'm sorry, I don't know.
I will try to stay long as I can. I do have something else, but I'll try to stay long as I can.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, maybe Jill and Shandlin could go first, because I'm willing to stay.
Yeah, I can stay till 7, so that's fine with me too.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the question was, will you advocate for the dismantlement of Act 10, and how will you ensure teachers are treated better within our state?
Did you want me to go first, Rachel?
Sure.
I can go first. Yeah, sure. It'll take an act of the legislature to dismantle Act 10, but I do believe that it has done a lot of damage to our public school system and to the teaching profession. And so I would actively work to make sure that those damages are known, and the impact that it has had on the number of teachers that we have in our classroom, the recruitment of teachers, the teachers staying in our classroom, and then the impact that it has had, especially on our highest poverty school districts. When we've had to do so much more with less, especially these past 10 years when we've seen a lot of growth in our economy, but teacher salaries have stagnated. The respect for the profession is not where it should be either. And what we've learned through this pandemic is that teachers are our local heroes. They are our first responders. And so I would actively work to restore the teaching profession. I would have the unions at the table as part of the discussions when we're talking about policy at DPI. When we are advocating statewide, or when we're advocating in the legislature, or when we're testifying at hearings, I think all voices need to be represented. And so that's what I would do. I would also work regionally with our School Boards Association as well as our teachers union to look at regional compensation plans so that we can mitigate a lot of this jumping between school districts for higher salaries. For example, teachers need to see that they have that we do everything we can to keep them there.
Thank you for that question. So when Act 10 was enacted, I was working at the Milwaukee Public Schools, and I saw how it adversely affected some of the teachers. The union is there to protect the rights of the members, to make sure that there are proper work conditions, and make sure that they're paid correctly, to make sure, for example, if a teacher is working an after-school program, they get additional compensation instead of the administrator saying, now you have to work 11 hours for the same pay. At the same time, I think that there needs to be a delicate balance, because like any other profession, occasionally we have a bad apple. And so how the whole situation with the bad apple is approached makes the whole union looks bad. And so I think back to, just last week, one of the teachers in Wisconsin gave an assignment out about slavery. And one of the questions was, this was actually virtual learning. True. The question was, if your slave didn't do what you told them to do, what would you do to your slave? That's very hurtful. You know what? And it's, people, it's not just harmful for Black people. It's also harmful for white people, because it brings up wounds from our country and what we have done wrong in the past. And so this parent, just imagine this parent looking at their child with this question that pops up, just the insensitivity of it. And so now there's this argument about whether this person should be terminated. The union is saying that they did it according, they didn't cause harm, they didn't cause justice. So that's why I keep coming back to my having compassion for understanding differences and how we approach people and how we approach things, and being able to collaborate with people who possess knowledge in an area or experiences that you don't experience, including me, and then communicating. How is it that we're going to move along? What are going to be some non-negotiables that if a person does this, they have to leave the teaching field? And one of them should be, if you cause mental or emotional harm to a child, whether intentional or unintentional, that's harm, that's trauma to that child for the rest of their life. And so we just have to have some common understanding about how to make sure that our teachers are protected, but at the same time, when something goes wrong, just like in the medical field, that's why doctors have malpractice insurance, right? That we are comfortable saying we're not going to accept this. This is not what we expect our students to have to endure. And so for that, you can't continue to do this. We can't take a risk on you harming generations of students and their mental wellness.
Rachel, you want me to go next? Great. So I was opposed to Act 10. I protested in the streets with many of our teachers and our youth that were upset about what was happening. We're still recovering from the damage that was done. Recruiting and retaining teachers is a part of it. But I just to talk a little bit about my experience working with our unions. I was a union member, of course, as a teacher, and then as principal. When we worked together to move the success of a school, in fact, we were able to do that really successfully, taking our third grade readers from 58% proficient or advanced to 100% of our readers reading proficiently. We did that with the teachers. There is no way we could have accomplished that without them being at the table. This was not a problem with the union. The union always was a huge partner. It was never the enemy. It was something that we did together. As the lead principal in Madison, one of my parts of my job, in addition to supporting 32 elementary school principals, was to specifically work with principals, with elementary school teachers that were being put on a plan of improvement. And so I worked really closely with the union in doing that. And it seems like it would have maybe been an antagonistic kind of relationship where I was supporting the principal and the union was supporting the teacher, but it wasn't like that at all. It was all about us working together to help the teachers improve. And in fact, the union said they wish there was a role like mine at the middle and high school level because they found it so valuable. I've never used the union as an excuse to not get good things done for kids at the state level. WEAC is at the table with us all the time when we're making important decisions to make sure teacher voice is represented. I've worked to build lots of programs where teachers are informing the work that we're doing because it's critically important for us to do that moving forward. Our unions make us stronger, and as good leaders, we don't look at the union as any kind of barrier. It's something that we bring in, we work together, and it gives teacher voices. And I have a history of doing that and would continue that as state superintendent.
Well, thank you for that question. And we had those discussions statewide with the teacher associations. And I'll tell you that when I was a teacher, I negotiated contracts. My wife paid her dues until she retired last year, long after the union fell apart in their community. And my mother will tell you that the union is what created a career that she was part of. So it's been part of my life, my whole entire life. But I'm going to allude to something I said earlier in this conversation, is that when crisis hits, I like to say things like, here's our shot. And this is the same thing I told MTI, and it's the same thing I told WEAC. Let's redefine this whole notion that you're going to recreate something that was 20 years ago. I mean, quite frankly, in our world, that's laughable. Tell me what you're going to do next. And so how can you become a professional organization? If I'm state superintendent, you're going to have a hand in licensing. You're going to have a hand in training. You're going to have a hand in talking about staff development. How can you be the bar association? How can you be the AMA? How can you be the defender of all of the professionalism and the skill and the defender of this work that we do? How can you be that person for all of us? Don't sit in a room and tell me that you want to recreate what used to be, because there's never a time in our history of the humankind that we ever did something we used to do. We start over with opportunity to move forward. You guys could be great. You could be 100% better than you were before. Think like that. And so a lot of them, I had a lot of good positive feedback from them. I think we caused some thoughts there because I think they could be different. I have a long relationship with those folks, and I think they would be at the table in my administration for all the reasons that Sheila listed, because they do the work, they know what's going on. I want them to become a professional organization. I would press that, I would push them to be leaders, and I would encourage them all to do that. So that's where my stance would be on that. I just think anytime we have in this world, we have to move forward, and the notion of moving backwards makes no sense to me anyway.
I think.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. I was opposed to Act 10 as well. You know, none of us superintendents asked for that. I come from a union household. My father was in the trades, an international operating engineer. I was also the president-elect of our administrators union when I worked in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I think it was important for us to work together and let our teachers know that we're not going to treat you any differently. We are going to revere and honor you and celebrate your accomplishments, and we're not going to overreach. And the Brown Deer School Board never overreached its decision-making and governance by taking away benefits. In fact, we gave more to the teachers through our collaborative practices. So we worked together for an instructional calendar that provided more instructional minutes for kids, but also gave professional learning team planning time for every single teacher in the district. We also were able to save money on an insurance policy, but we worked with an insurance committee to make those decisions and make a recommendation to the board. So we never made those decisions just because of Act 10. In fact, the relationship between my teachers, we met every month or more often if needed, to talk about all the good things, but all the things that we needed to work on. And in fact, the night before they went to protest in Madison, they called me and said, Deb, we really want to go. And I said, you got to go. You go, because this is important to you and your livelihood. I support you. And that's why my Brown teachers have endorsed me for my campaign. And all the 12 cousins and nephews and nieces that I have in education in public schools in Western Kenosha County and Walworth County. So I think moving forward, it's about figuring out how to continue to create these great working conditions that you want people to stay in your school district and stay in Wisconsin. And I have worked on with my platform to honor, the last strategy of my platform is to honor our profession. I've already contacted the Wisconsin School Public Relations Association so that we can rebrand and re-image teaching, because I think if parents realize one thing is that our teachers have a more profound effect on our kids than just teaching content. And our parents, I think, appreciate teachers, and people in our communities do so. So I think it's important that we continue to elevate and rise the level of the profession, continuing to recruit people into the profession, the best and brightest, so that we can make sure our schools are successful and our kids are taught by high quality teachers. Thank you.
So I was a teacher when Act 10 happened, and it was life-changing. I don't remember the exact amount of take-home money that I lost, but I think it was between $4,000 and $5,000 a year is what I lost. And I had really young kids at the time, and that was tough. The workloads increased. They wanted you to do a bunch more meetings. School day increased for kids, and a lot of people just left. And I think that the idea that it was there to get the bad apples or to get the teachers who are underperforming out is a lie. I mean, we look, there's bad apples and bad police officers, but the police and the fire unions were there, right? They didn't get lost. So what's the difference between the teachers union and the fire and police union? Well, number one, teachers union is mostly or predominantly women, right? And also predominantly Democrat. The Republican and the fire and the police, predominantly men, predominantly Republican. And so you look at it like that really it's a power thing. I mean, we always had the ability to go after bad teachers. And the reason why some weren't is because the administrators didn't want to go through the work to do it, because it's tough. You have to build a case against someone to get them out. And it's true. That's what you have to do. And it takes a lot of progressive discipline to get there and a long time to do it. Done it. Got rid of people before. Got people out. And underperformers and people who should not be in the teaching field. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. But it's what needs to be done. And, but to say that it was there, the Act 10 was there to get rid of bad teachers, that's not why it was there. And I think that we shouldn't ignore that fact. So do I think we should bring it back? Yes, I think teachers' unions have a role to play in the future of our country. Unions in general do. And I believe that we need to empower them. They do need to start looking at things a little bit different. I think I heard, I don't remember what union, maybe Chicago or somewhere else, was talking about, instead of saying that I want a lower class size for me as a teacher, frame it as the kids have more opportunity when you have lower class sizes. And so really changing that narrative, I think, is important especially when we're talking to a population who might already be opposed to unions. I think, allows the system to allows a different view essentially to move those forward. But that's my view, is that we need to bring back unions, and we need them for systemic change, to do that collective advocacy, whatever, and to move forward. So thanks.
I thank you all so much for your time, and everybody have a good night. Thank you.